Thank you so much. So good morning. It is now 10:09 a.m. I will call the Sewage and Water Board Audit Committee meeting to order. Special Counsel, please call the roll.
Director Cole, Director Duplessis,
Present.
Director Anthrop,
Present.
Director Whitfin, Councilmember King. We do not have a quorum, however, there are no action items, so we may proceed with the presentation items. And also, I'd like to note for the record that Director Howard is here.
Thank you so much. We'll now proceed with our first of two presentation items. We have Ms. Brandy Smith from Eisenamper with our annual financial statement audit for 2024. Ms. Smith, good morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm here to present on the 2024 financial statement audit and single audit, which is the audit of your federal compliance grants. So we are required to issue your final audits 6 months after your year end. So the due date for your 2024 audit was June 30th, 2025, and we were able to meet that deadline. So I'm just going to present a high-level results of the audits and the reports that we issued. So the first report that we issued is your financial statement audit. I believe you have copies of the report, and it's the bigger report. And it includes your financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2024. And we gave a unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, the old terminology, but it was an unmodified opinion that we believe that your financial statements were materially correct in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So in the course of our audit, we test significant accounts. We look at internal controls over financial reporting. We also look at compliance with various laws and regulations. And as part of our audit procedures, we of course don't look at every single transaction. It's not possible to look at every single transaction, but we select samples and we look at significant accounts, and we also look at some smaller accounts and sample from there. And based on the results of our procedures, like I mentioned, we do believe that your financial statements were materially correct in accordance with GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles. Some high-level financial data in the report. Your total assets between 2023 and 2024 increased about $284 million, or about 6% from the prior year. And the majority of that increase is from property, plant, and equipment, so various construction projects that are ongoing, offset by depreciation of prior projects. So that was the largest increase in assets on your financial statements. Your liabilities between 23 and 24 increased by about $74 million, or 5%. And the largest increase in your liabilities was related to the WIFIA debt. So you issued about $74 million of WIFIA debt in 2024, and that was also offset by decreases from repayments of previous debt. Overall, in 2024, the organization had an operating loss of $52 million compared to an operating loss of $54 million in 2023. And as always, every year, those operating losses are offset by non-operating revenues, which is primarily your property tax revenues and also contributions from other government agencies or grants that you received during the year. So overall, you had operating revenues that decreased by about $6 million, but overall, your total increase in net position or your net income for the year was $162 million compared to net income of $171 million in 2023. And behind the financial statements, if you look in the report, there are notes to the statements, and that includes summary of the various amounts that are included within the financial statements. It goes through the significant accounting policies, and if you have questions on some of the larger numbers of more detail, like for example, you'll see bonds payable. You can see a detail of all of the bonds outstanding and the activity during the year. So there's a lot of information in the report, and good to read through. If you have questions about some of the information in there. I forgot to mention before the statements, there's a section called Management's Discussion and Analysis, and it goes through management's discussion of significant changes that occurred between 23 and 24, and then also 22 and 23. So again, it has some good information in there as well, just if you want more insight as to what's reported on the financial statements. As part of our audit procedures, we look at significant estimates and we review those estimates for reasonableness. So some of the significant estimates that we look at are the pension and other post-retirement benefits accrual. So that is a significant estimate that is determined by an actuary that has experience with governments, other entities around the country. They look at your census data, they determine what the board's potential estimate for future pension claims and post-retirement claims, and that amount is what is recorded on the financial statements. In addition, allowance for doubtful accounts for your accounts receivable. As you are aware, you have large accounts receivable balances based on customers that may not have paid for that month of December or for previous months. So management reviews those receivables to determine how much is determined or estimated to be uncollectible. So that is a significant estimate that we look at. Some other ones, depreciation on your property, plant, and equipment, your investment valuation, and then also lease liabilities and liabilities related to subscription-based IT arrangements. So there was a new accounting standard a couple of years ago where you have to record a liability for any IT agreements that you have future costs that you're committed to pay. So for the financial statement audit, we did not have any findings to report, so that's a good thing. Any questions before I move on to the other reports?
I have none.
Okay, the next report that we issue is the single audit report. And for any government or nonprofit entity that receives at least $750,000 of federal funding or spends at least $750,000 of federal funding in a particular year, we perform a compliance audit of your federal grants.
We'll use the clicker. You
Oh,
can
sure.
move it if you want to.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
For the-
Let's see. The single audit report, is it all in this package?
what's the back?
Skipping through to the next report. This is the end. You'll see a bunch of tables at the end of the financial statement audit report, and this is statistical data that the board puts together, that management puts together. So that's an interesting read as well if you want to get more information on 10-year historical data for the board. Okay, so this is our single audit report. And here we issued two letters, one a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance for the financial statement audit, and then the second letter is a report on internal control over compliance for your federal grant programs. So here we obtain a list of your federal expenditures for the year. As you can see, the largest expenditures are towards the bottom. The disaster grants, public assistance was over $30 million, and then the hazard mitigation grant program was about $10 million. And then up above, the WIFIA, I mentioned the WIFIA loan. So you had drawdowns of about 74 million in 2024, and those funds were spent during that year, so that we also included as part of our federal compliance audit procedures. The two grants that we were required to audit this year was the WIFIA program and also the FEMA disaster grants. And we did not have any internal control exceptions or any compliance findings for those two grants that we audited as part of our single audit. And that it states, this is the, where we would report any findings that we have, and you can see at the bottom, number 2 and number 3, we had no financial statement findings and no federal compliance findings. The next report that we issue, which I don't believe is on here, is our management letter. And the management letter, we report any control deficiencies or any compliance items that we feel are not significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, but we feel need to be communicated to governance. And we had 2 items, management letter comments to report. The Louisiana Legislative Auditor requires us to report any instances of theft or fraud that are over $1,000. So one item, one management letter comment that we reported was related to workers' comp fraud that occurred in 24, it may have started before 24. And then also a separate comment related to theft of brass and copper wires. There was a few instances of that we reported as a separate management letter comment. And then the last report that we issued is statewide agreed upon procedures. So the state requires us to, in addition to our normal audit procedures, we do a separate agreed upon procedures engagement where we look at various policies and procedures. We do additional testing related to internal controls in various areas like cash receipts, disbursements, credit cards, travel reimbursement, and we did not have any exceptions in our agreed upon procedures engagement this year. So those are all of the reports that we issued, and just some general overall comments. We did not have any disagreements with management. If we did, we would be required to report that to you. We did have some audit adjustments which were reviewed and approved by management. In addition, there were some unrecorded adjustments, but we determined those to be immaterial. So we do not believe those materially impacted the financial statements. In addition, like I mentioned, we didn't have any disagreements. We didn't have any issues with completing our audit procedures. We were able to get the information timely, and we were able to complete the audit more timely. And, that is the goal going forward, to move up that even further and further, but we were able to get the reports to the state by the deadline.
That's excellent news. Kudos to staff and everybody involved. That has not always been the case, and so I am excited to hear that we're trending positives and there are no findings. So thank you.
I'd just like to note for the record that Director Pacho is in attendance as well.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon.
I appreciate
Hit the
it.
clicker, please.
With no questions, we'll go ahead and move to the second presentation item. We have our third quarter audit department update from Mr. Ed Sullivan.
Thank you so much. Okay. So the primary thing to present on this quarter is going to be the hazardous chemical handling pay audit. Hazardous chemical handling pay is basically SWBNO's version of hazard pay. It's a 10% premium that goes to employees hourly when they have direct physical interaction with a hazardous chemical. We report, it was issued on July 26, 2025, and management response has been received. This should note, this report was originally included as part of the overtime pay audit, but we separated it into its own review during the planning process when we saw that there was just a lot to kind of look at. So I'm glad we did, because we were able to kind of do a deeper dive on these issues. The review scope was any chem hours or chem pay hours recorded from 10/1/23 to 9/30/24. And just to give a little code breakdown of what chem pay kind of looks like, there's different flavors or iterations of it. Chemical is just your normal chem pay, 10% on top of what we call RG or regular pay. And then, of course, there's overtime straight and overtime, which would be overtime premium on top of chem pay. And then, of course, if you work with chemicals on a holiday or during an emergency, et cetera. Those are all there. We found generally that 90% of the chem pay for the utility is used by the water purification team. That makes sense. I mean, they're working with chlorine and calcium oxide, known as lime or quicklime. And then the other 10% is in the boiler room. That would be sodium sulfate and sulfuric acid, which are also really tough to deal with. Okay, so.
Before you move on, just really quickly, you
Sure.
went down the line of the codes, but dual chemical refers to what?
Right, so dual is if you have a dual role within the utility, and you worked chemical with that one role. So I'm a dual pay employee, and so you get two pay rates essentially if you're in two different roles within the organization. So it would be, I'm a dual pay employee and I got chemical for that. And then, of course, dual straight overtime would be a dual pay employee working overtime. Good question, though.
Thank you.
Sure. Just real quick, our review objectives for this audit were determine whether the recordation of employee hours for chem pay is accurate and sufficiently supported, whether chem pay is utilized judiciously and in accordance with established P&P with both SWBNO and the city civil service, the adequacy and effectiveness of any applicable enforced directive controls. Those are basically any governing P&P that we have in place here at the utility. Whether chem pay is employed with the appropriate authorization, accountability, and oversight from divisional or departmental management. And then, of course, evaluate the overall efficiency of the utilization of chem pay. It was a pretty good review. I genuinely thought so and told management throughout. We did note 5 findings. The first is eligibility and authorization. Second was directive controls regarding pay rates and calculations. Third was pay table configs for specifically the ChemPay codes. Fourth was hazardous chemical work volume for our teams. And lastly was the ChemPay logs, and I'll get into each of these during the presentation. And of course, I sent out management's response, but all recommendations from internal audit had been agreed to by management. So the first issue is eligibility and authorization. First is, this is broke out really 1A and 1B. Some employees are receiving ChemPay without having completed the required safety training courses. There's 2 courses that you have to complete just to be able to receive ChemPay. First one is OSHA 10. It's really the entry-level OSHA training that you get for basic safety. And second is HAZCOM. It's really more focused on hazardous chemicals, what hazardous labels look like, how to fill out hazardous chemical sheets, those kinds of things. We had 46 overall employees that received ChemPay during the course of the review. 25 of them needed at least one of the safety trainings to be able to be qualified. However, there were only 12 that are currently active in the organization, and 9 of those predated the policy. So we can kind of point to, okay, it was just possibly even lost in the transition of the new ChemPay policy, right? These people just kind of fell through the cracks. Our recommendation was to management just, get these folks the right trainings they need before they record any more ChemPay, and they agreed to their credit at that moment.
Is the training annual, or is it?
It's ad hoc whenever they come on. You have to basically, if you want ChemPay, there's a ChemPay form that you have to do, and so if someone says, okay, this person now will, for their new job, will touch chemicals during the normal course of it, then the form has to be filled out, and you have to fill out which chemicals on the tier 2 list that you'll touch. And yes, so they would have to go through that safety, and then that form goes to HR, and they're set up within the system to be able to receive ChemPay. So if they're hired, to your point, if they're hired straight away to do ChemPay, yes, it's upon hire. But if they're moved to that position, then it becomes that at that time.
It's just interesting that it's not an annual.
Right. Oh, right. Whether they have to re-go through it at some point, right? Yeah.
Yes, that would be
That-
ideal.
That's a good question. And the second one is receiving ChemPay without the proper authorization from senior management. This is the authorization form. We found pretty good compliance with this. Of the 46 overall, 6 did not have the form, but 4 did have an earlier version of the form prior to the policy on file. It was just basically like a letter from the superintendent at the time, saying that this is what they do and I'm aware of it, et cetera. So we're going to get those 4 individuals, at least management will get those 4 individuals with the right appropriate form. Yeah, so recommendation 1.1, to authorize the staff accepted by GSO. And the centralized tracking piece is that we thought that, so the training is done by the training department, but the setup of the individuals for ChemPay is done in human resources. If they could centralize those 2 things, we could probably avoid some aberrations going forward in the future. Okay, so the second issue is directive controls regarding pay rates and calculations. So no employees are paid according to civil services step and grade system. Basically, your pay grade, and then there's steps that go all the way across that you get promoted. Each step is 1.25%, but those are compounded. So, and it's slightly off from both the internal job aids that they use in the payroll department and our publicly promulgated policies. So, for instance, if you work a regular time in the afternoon, it's 2.5% on top of your regular pay, but that's 2 steps according to the step and grade system, so it's 2.51%. That doesn't seem like much, but as it compounds, it's a fair amount, right? So they're getting paid correctly in the system, but just if there's a manual recalc needed by the payroll team, the aids that they use are those rounder numbers down, right? So, and for ChemPay, for example, it's 10% premium on top of your regular pay, but it's 8 steps, which is 10.44% within, so it's 1.25 to whatever power it is, right? So it's compounded. And the same goes for SWIP nose pay policies. It's rounded. It's outlined as 10% rather than 10.44. So they're getting paid correctly, but we want to have policies that are transparent and clear because that really reduces traffic to the office here on the third floor, right? And questions to payroll and those kinds of things. So, and those were agreed to by Dave. So, pay table configurations within, we did a high-level recalculation of, there were 2,264 transactions overall during our scope, meaning that if anybody logged ChemPay at any time, all we did was we took whatever their RG rate was at that time and did the calculation to make sure it was correct. 90% of the time, a simple recalc was able to get that done. 10% were at least slightly off. So of those 10%, we took a sample and did a little deeper dive of the entire weekly pay for those individuals, and it was material off for those three. So we brought those to payroll. They corrected the pay for those individuals. So our recommendation, when we peeled back the onion on where it's starting from, is that they weren't set up correctly down in HR, right? So when they're configured as being a ChemPay receiving employee, a couple of the boxes were not quite checked correctly. So our recommendation would be to just reconfigure all the pay codes for ChemPay within HR, and that should correct it moving forward.
In general, where was the position of the erroneous payments? Was it higher? Was it lower?
There were 3 that were less. They were paid less. I highlighted them in detail within the report.
Okay.
But they have been made whole, those 3 individuals. That they were quick with that. The 4th issue is hazardous chemical work volume. So this came to the attention performing the prior test. Like I said, we did a side-by-side, basically a manual recalc of someone's reg pay to their chem pay, but we kept finding some that had no reg pay at all. So we kind of set those aside as a separate test and did a little deeper dive. We found individuals that were recording only chem for weeks at a time, perhaps months, some of them. So we thought, why is this person not getting regular pay? We brought them to their direct supervisor who said, no, that's accurate. They work in the they work in the lime room. But we weren't finding this phenomenon with Carrollton. We only found it at Algiers. And once we got higher up to director level management, they said, yeah, we have issues, mechanical issues with the lime slakers in Algiers. So they're older and they go offline from time to time. They require more frequent adjustments. Because they require more frequent adjustments, it's more close oversight and more constant interaction for the employees, which results in this extreme chem pay over time. So our recommendation was to address this as fast as we could, modify the work schedules to get some rotations in and out of there, and repair the equipment. Steve agreed in the response, and he also noted that the lime system in Algiers is going to be transitioning to liquid lime soon, which should help alleviate some of this issue. So, yeah.
So when you identified it, it was accurate that they were getting the pay?
Correct. That's how we started. We went to the logs and the timesheets to their immediate supervisor, and they said, yeah, they were there. It's happening. And lastly is the most minor of the issues, is they're required to keep a ChemPay log, which basically outlines the chemicals that they touched that week and what justifies the hours that they used creating that. It's supposed to be signed by the individual and their supervisor. We found 100% compliance with the existence of the logs, which is great. About 39%, the hours didn't quite reconcile with what they had in the system, whether it was higher or lower. So our recommendation is to just do a reconciliation of your weekly chemical log before submitting your timesheet to make sure that they're both in concert before they get into the system. Some of these issues will be obviously alleviated by our movement to electronic timekeeping system, which is being procured now, and I believe it's set for rollout in early 27, right now, 2027. But yeah, again, I think this is a minor issue compared to others. That's all we had for the chemical pay audit. The only thing I had is where we're at with the remainder of the ongoing initiatives in internal audit right now. The billing audits and QA/QC, that began in Q2. We're doing a monthly batch for customer service when, the manual bill, level bill recalculation became part of legislation. They were having a hard time transitioning in CSM. So we're helping customer service kind of do manual recalcs to make sure it's correct. That should have no need relatively soon because AMI full rollout is almost done. Yay. So we'll probably do our final batch of that this month and end that in Q3. I just began working on Act 393 audit in Q2. 393 basically governs the goings-on of this part of it here, to make sure that our committee meetings and board meetings have accessibility for those with disabilities. And then we're still in the testing phase of the SC&I audit, which is service connections and inspections. We're going to be wrapping up testing soon. We had to expand testing in a few little areas, particularly with the RGN system, but we're going to be wrapping up testing soon, and we should be moving to reporting relatively soon. That's all I had.
I just have just one thought,
Sure.
and if I'm off base, just please let me know.
Sure.
As you went through this audit, was there any consideration where you saw maybe a job where there was routine contact with the chemicals? And would it make more sense that we just adjust it so that there's a regular pay associated with that chemical composition and not having to do overtime every time the individual interacted with the chemicals?
I had the exact same question.
Just out of consideration, because this is the first time that we're really diving deep into the chemical pay
Right.
that I'm aware of. So just
Right.
overall question, your thoughts.
Chem pay is designed, as an occasional premium for something that occasionally happens, right? If someone is constantly in hazard's way during every moment of every day, that's a completely different job code, right? And probably would require a job study of a completely different, right? I mean, but it should be an, occasional thing to have to record, to your point. So yes, I was a little, I was concerned when I saw those continual chem pay within the Lime Room in Algiers. I consulted with our safety team. They said it's not a direct safety issue, but it could be a long-term occupational health issue. Could be, right? I mean, constant exposure over long ranges of time could take a toll after time. This wasn't a safety audit. It was just a chem pay audit. So, and that was one of the challenges with this. With any audit, when you find something, you can't unsee things, and then you have to either expand what the audit's about a little bit, or put it to the side and put that as part of some kind of operational audit for the water purification team or something. We chose to just kind of do it right then and there. The same thing with the issues we found in payroll, right? We could have put that aside to do for a payroll audit at some point down the road, or we can just comb through these issues now and take a little longer time to do it. But to answer your question, yeah, it wasn't. I'm sure at some point we'll do an operational audit of the purification team itself. Maybe we'll get a little more insight into how much they're actually touching in those times. But all we can do now for this one was take the data that they were recording in payroll and determine whether that was indicative of the work actually being performed.
I appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, I think my thought was that, if someone is routinely handling hazardous chemicals as a part of their normal job responsibilities, that should just be a part of their normal pay. We should just pay them more.
Yep.
Because I would think, as an auditor, that you would be concerned that any kind of premium on top of your regular pay is a potential for fraud.
Sure.
And while obviously you found that, they're following the policies for the most part and we're largely in compliance, I would still think that it would be better if it was just a more straightforward system that, you know, people were just appropriately compensated for the work that they're being asked to do. So I know that's sort of outside the scope of what you were looking at, but I think in terms of having management present here as well, that it would make sense to look into, you know, if there are certain positions within the chemical house, for instance, perhaps we need to do a job study and just raise those rates of pay and reduce the amount of hazard pay that they're eligible for so that those people can just be appropriately paid for the risk that they're taking on a daily basis.
We will look into that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think that's great. And then annual training or more frequent training, especially with employees who've been here for a long time.
Right.
Especially in these areas with hazardous materials.
Duly noted.
Any other comments? All right, that's great. Thank you, I appreciate it. Are there any public comments?
No public comments, Chair.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Moved by Director Anthrop.
Seconded? There's only two of us. How does that work?
Well, I'm just gonna say we are adjourned.
Yeah,
Thank you
okay.
so much for your time.